Okay, this clip is another spiritual encounter that was recorded by my maternal grandmother. And if she had not written it down, I would not have known anything about it. But it happened in 1964, and it's another example, real life example of the role that angels, spiritual beings, play in our lives, even though we might be unaware of what and why it's happening. There's a great book, if you want a summary book, by the late Billy Graham called Angels, God's Secret Agents, and it has a nice summary of a bunch of different angelic stories, experiences that people had in their lives with angels in the modern times. So back to 1964, this is from my great-grandmother Cora Hanson Yanzito's life, and I'm going to include a picture of hers here. She was a very sweet, stable, calm, faithful woman, and she had Norwegian parents that were immigrants that came to the Chicago area, and she ended up meeting her beloved husband, who was an Italian immigrant, Michael Yanzito, whose family also, his parents emigrated from the southern boot of Italy, and first into the coal mines of Pennsylvania, and then they came out to Chicago as well. And they met in a church that they ended up meeting in the young people's group and getting married. I have some of their love poems, which is quite beautiful. I'll probably do them in a different episode. I don't have them out today. So this is fast forward. She's now a widow, Cora. Michael had died from a genetic liver cancer in 1957, so she'd been a widow for 7 years. She was living in Chicago on the second floor of a home that one of her twin daughters and family lived on the first floor. So my grandmother Eunice and her husband Merle, who is a Baptist minister, were coming from their home in Michigan to visit with her. And he was probably doing some Baptist church meetings. And they were coming to pick up Cora to come and stay with them because Bernice and Wally were going to go away on a wedding anniversary trip. So they didn't want her, she's kind of elderly at this point, they didn't want her to be by herself. And this is the part where the angels come in. So they're getting ready to leave for the trip. And I'm not born yet. My mom's east in college. And she's just met my dad. And this is what my grandmother wrote. Cora had a visit of a pleasant and unearthly spirit that was hard to understand. So she could see the angelic spirit, and if she couldn't understand it, to me it means it was communicating in some tongue of angels that she could not, translate for herself, but that she found it very touching and peaceful. So then the part that is connected to this is the sad part is immediately they get into the car, they start driving, and it's a weird blizzard kind of whiteout day. So they end up getting into a car accident on their way to Michigan. And my grandmother writes, near Benton Harbor, Michigan. We were involved in a car accident because of a blizzard and 40-mile-per-hour winds. A car ahead of us stopped on the road because of snow blowing off of an overpass, and it blocked our view. My husband Merle, who was driving, could not see the car, and he hit the car that was under the overpass. Merle jumped out of the car and ran down the highway to try to ward and warn off oncoming traffic. but it was too late, and a big truck hit both cars. So my grandmother Eunice, who's telling this story, was in the passenger seat, and her mother Cora, the one that had just seen the angel, was in the back seat that got rear-ended by this truck. So my grandmother Eunice, she says, I survived in the front seat wearing a seatbelt, which at the time was only just across the hips. So, and I know her head came forward and smashed into the dashboard from that like whiplash. So she had a big scar on her face that she would, like, I couldn't notice in the future, but she was still self-conscious of. But my mother, Cora, riding in the back seat, had no seatbelt, and she was thrown from the car, and she died instantly. In the hospital, they told me that if my injury had been 1 inch in another direction, I would have been a vegetable. As it was, I had head and face injuries and a broken arm. In surgery, the doctor broke my jaw to set the broken bones, and then he wired my jaws together for some weeks. During that time, I ate all liquids through a straw. Someone loaned us a blender, and she actually ate an apple pie in the blender, and she could enjoy it. She even tried to sing in church. Merle had several injuries physically. I feel the accident affected him emotionally, but he never expressed his thoughts. So, I mean, he was, I'm sure, had survivor's guilt because he was the driver, and then he couldn't stop the truck coming, that hit his wife and his mother-in-law. But when guilt feelings came, Eunice says, I remembered Mom's spiritual visit, the spirit that visited her before we left Chicago. So did she understand the future? That soon she would be in eternity with her husband and other members of her family and the friends who had preceded her? This thought helped me accept her death, also that she did not have to suffer. It was several weeks before the accident. I had read a prayer written hundreds of years ago, and it's one that's very well known still to this day. But so a few weeks before the accident, my grandmother, when she lost her mom, the poem was, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So one of the things that touched me about this story, and I personally connected with through my own experiences, is that Cora, her soul was ripped out of her body in this accident. She didn't get to slowly transition to the spiritual realm because of how she died. But the angels, one of the things, and you can see this in Billy Graham's book if you read through that, or other people's experiences, and there's Bible verses you can search on for this. One of the jobs for angels is to accompany our souls as we go back to the heavenly realm to be with our Lord Creator, because we are eternal. So she got to see a glimpse, so it's like, it's going to be okay. Like, it's going to be, because it's confusing, right? You're in your body, and then all of a sudden you're popped out and you're seeing yourself laying on the road. We've heard lots of stories here in 2025 of people having that experience, and sometimes being allowed to come back in to their physically broken body, and that can be good, but it can also be physically painful. So I put this clip together today in this little short film about my great-grandmother Cora Hansen Yanzito's life and accidental death that was somehow mysteriously already known by the angelic side. On the last morning of her life, she gets a visit from an angelic being to kind of prepare her for the transition, even though she didn't understand it at that point in time. And that encounter has touched my own life, and I'll probably do this in another episode in the future that I'm planning, When I was a little girl, I lost my brother when I was turning 3 years old to a birth defect that he had, and our family, suffered together trying to get through that. So I kind of think about Cora, that she was already on the other side, kind of helping us. My mom had already gone through the loss of her grandmother through a family tragedy. So we don't always necessarily know why things are happening, but what is the spiritual purpose? But we are definitely in the palm of God's hands, because you can feel it when you're in that tragedy often, that you are not alone and that you have help. Maybe sometimes it's invisible. But I just wanted to share that with you, because I know there's many people that have suffered and still suffering from the loss of loved ones and not fully understanding why at the time it happens. And that's what I kind of cover in my spiritual fiction series, or I make an attempt in the calendar novel series, that we don't always understand the suffering that we're going through here on the physical plane, but that it does become revealed when we are on the other side and in the spiritual heavenly realms with our God, our Creator, and we're meeting our Lord of heaven and earth once again. So just hoping that's a little encouragement for those of you pondering the mysteries of life today. This is Erica Swenson Elliott, the Story Keeper, signing off, and I prepared and made this little short for you on Friday, March 14th, in the year of our Lord, 2025. Namaste. Peace be to you.